Sorry, I'm just switching us on to record. Excellent, we've gone live. So welcome to our session on parental leave and returning to work. My name is Alyson Ainsworth. I'm going to be your host for the session today. And I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Russ Hartland-Shaw and Clare Endicott. I will hand over to them to introduce. Russ, do you want to go first?
Yeah, hi, my name is Russ Hartland-Shaw and I'm a leadership coach for 1080. And this is a topic that's very close to my heart because I have returned to work having been on parental leave myself. So I'm quite excited to talk about this today.
Thanks, Russell. Clare.
So my name is Clare Endicott. I'm obviously a trained parental leave coach. I'm also a career transition coach, helping over about 250 people sort of flourish in their career. I was in the past a human resource business partner for an investment bank. So I've seen when this has worked really well, and obviously I've seen when things have worked not so well. And certainly that's sort of informed my my guidance when I'm working with clients in terms of parental leave. I'm also trained in the balance tool, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with, but it's a kind of holistic tool that allows people just to take stock of their working and personal lives. And I'm a working mother.
Excellent. Thanks, Clare. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so I'm going to start with the question, what is parental leave and how are we defining it? Because in this situation, we're covering both maternity and paternity leave. So parental as in both parents. And it is, as Clare, I'm sure will go on to explain, quite a complex thing that covers a lot of different things. It's not just as simple as maternity cover anymore. So Clare, would you like to give us a definition?
So I'm just going to do the highlights because, as Alyson rightly said, it is quite complicated. So maternity leave is ordinary maternity leave, and that's 26 weeks where you return to exactly the same job. And for some people who want to take additional maternity leave, that's they return to the same job or similar, but they have it should be the same conditions or improved conditions. Then there's obviously paternity leave, that's up to 2 weeks. And you can get statutory paternity pay for that. Adoption leave, very similar to maternity leave in its structure. And then there's shared parental leave, and that came into being from April 2015. And you can share up to 50 weeks and up to 37 of leave and up to 37 weeks of pay between you. You need to share the pay and the leave in the first year after your child is born or placed with you for adoption. It's probably worthwhile. It is a complicated area. If this is something you want to explore, that you perhaps look at your company's handbook or you discuss with HR to see actually what's most beneficial for you. And I know, Russ, you've actually experienced it. So that's an interesting.
Yeah, and it is. You're very reliant on both employers kind of being open to kind of working through, because it's a reasonably new addition to the suite of leaves that are available. And I know that when my husband and I did it, it was very new, and because it was we were two men going through this process, we were very lucky that we had two employers that were kind of happy to kind of talk to one another and work it out. So I think my advice is probably absolutely speak to your employer and get the advice from them.
Yeah, because it does vary, because what you said there, Clare, is about statutory leave. But I know my son and his wife, his partner, have just gone on to paternity leave with their second child, and they get quite a decent chunk of time off. It's not just 2 weeks. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the enhanced bits were what were confusing for us. So it was sort of understanding at what point was one person going to take over, and then the next person, what point in their process of adoption leave were they going to kind of pick up. It was all quite complex and complicated.
And I think
we navigated it.
Yeah, I think that's why I would say that it's really important to sort of discuss with HR, look at your handbook, because it may be that somebody has more advantageous scheme, and that's why you may want to reflect what's best for you as a family. But I think the key way I would say about
sorry.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, don't let it put you off. I think that's the key thing. Don't, if you're thinking about it, don't let it put you off, because there's a way through it. And I think a lot of people they sort of shy away from shared parental leave because it's too complicated. And I would say that with the right people in the right room, it's not. So don't be put off by it.
I think the takeaway I would say about all these different aspects of leave is that you shouldn't be adversely affected. Whatever kind of leave you're taking, you know, you are protected. So yeah, just perhaps that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so if we move on, Russ, I'm going to ask you to start on thinking about what some of the challenges in terms of returning to work. So what are some of the things that people need to be thinking about either before they go or when they come back?
So I was thinking back to my time, because I took adoption leave and took nearly a year out. And I was thinking about this question, and I think you can answer it there's two parts to it. I think the first part is about how you're feeling as an individual. And then I think the second part is what you're going to get from your organisation and what your organisation can offer you going back. But I also know when we were talking in the prep around this call, Claire made a great point about it's all about, which I think, you know, it's all about a great, what did you say? How did you phrase it really well? Like, it's all about a great exit as much as it is about a return to work as well. And I think that's critical as well. But I think when you think about that first point about how you're feeling, I think you have to validate what you're going through. And I think you have to accept that when you take any kind of extended leaves, but particularly when there's children involved, you are a different version of yourself. And I think we're all under pressure to kind of go back into the workplace and be the person that we were before. And I think the key challenge is accepting that you're not the same and validating those feelings either by yourself and getting other people to validate it for you. Equally, no one person is the same. So you might also be thinking, well, I should be feeling guilty. I should be feeling this. And actually you might not be. And I think that's fine as well. But I think it's very easy to kind of look to others to see how you should be feeling. So that would be the first part of that question. And then the second part is, what are you going to get from the organisation and how are you going to set yourself up for success? So often people take, not exclusively, but often people are expecting a change in working patterns, for example. And the one piece of advice that I think I can give to people is don't, for want of a better phrase, stitch yourself up. Don't go part-time and end up working full-time. And I think what I did was like looking around at everybody else's experiences and working out what my version of that needed to look like. And I was really adamant that the type of role that I was doing was quite a demanding job, but I didn't just want to effectively take a pay cut and still work the hours I was doing before. So you do have to change your mindset quite significantly around your working patterns. But then it's looking at the employer as to whether or not they can realistically offer that to you and being really honest with what it is you want. And equally, from an employer's perspective, what they want as well, because that's important. And we'll come on to kind of what challenges an employer faces later. But it's definitely got to be a two-way street between the employer and the individual. But you are going through a huge change when you are returning to work, and you're going through a huge change anyway, because regardless as to whether or not it's children involved, if you've taken a sabbatical, you'll have experienced things that, you know, outside of the work, because you'll experience a taste of what it's like to not be at work. And that is huge, I think, for an individual. I think we take it for granted that change is happening in the background, whether you like it or not, and you've just got to just take a moment to notice it.
And I think for you personally, Russ, you shared with us, you went through adoption, and so it wasn't just one child, you had two.
Yeah, I did.
And
we did.
We did, yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And suddenly, that's a big change.
It's a huge change. And you know, you and then particularly with paternity leave as well. I must admit, my experience of going through the extended adoption leave and effectively taking on the role of main carer, I have a newfound empathy for people that are on the paternity part of that, the 2 weeks out. And actually, I can remember many of us, I'm certainly guilty of that, or certainly I was, where you just sort of take that for granted that somebody's taking 2 weeks out to go and support their other half to having had a baby. And then they come back 2 weeks later and it's very much like, oh, well done, congratulations, you've had a baby, now let's crack on, and pat on the back and away we go. But actually what you don't realise is you've left a partner at home that is in the most vulnerable state they can possibly be in. Their whole world has been thrown up into the air. You've had no sleep, and you've just sort of, and you only had 2 weeks off to try and get your head around this. And I think we mustn't forget that as to how seismic that is for everybody involved, and regardless as to how little or how long people are off.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And Claire, do you want to add anything to that in terms of those key challenges?
I think I agree with you, Russ. And the word, when I was thinking about this this morning, I wrote down change. And I think you will have changed, you explained that so beautifully, Russ. But I also think that the team might have changed. I had a real example of someone I was coaching where every single person in their team changed, including their manager, navigating what that was like to come back to a different, notionally the same team, but actually nothing like the same team. Your workplace's strategy might have changed. The economic climate, if you've been away for 12 months, definitely probably has changed. And sometimes physically it's changed because your office might have moved. So it's actually, and how do you deal with that change? And I think the essence of change is often to try and keep, if it's practical, and I recognise sometimes I wasn't dressed till midday or lunchtime, when my son was very little. But it's actually, if you can keep a dialogue with work, you probably feel part more of that change, and actually I think that makes your transition back easier because it's no longer another country.
Yeah, agreed. And I think I actually returned to work having had an acquisition as well. So I think culturally the organisation was massive as well. So I'd had all of what you said when I went back to work. The team had changed, the manager had changed, everything changed. And we'd been acquired by a different org, which I was part of, but only literally as I was about to go off. And it's all there. They're massive, massive things that you go through. And you definitely feel that. But I think we're not great at recognizing that anyway, regardless as to what's going on. I think we just sort of think, oh, it's fine, we'll just keep going. But I think noticing it is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, and it's I mean, change, as you say, it's huge in that way, but also things like processes change, and performance reviews are change, and we've adopted a new competency framework while you've been away, and you're expected to know all about that stuff, and you're thinking, where did I miss that email? Yes, in 12 months you probably missed thousands of emails.
Yeah. Somebody told me once that I wasn't brave enough to do it, but they said, when you go off, when you come back, don't look at any of your emails and just go select all, delete. And I thought that's great advice, but I'm not sure I could do it. But you can see the value in it, can't you? Because when you do have like hundreds and hundreds of emails when you return back, it's a nightmare. I think when you've got children involved as well, I mean, it goes against all of your value set as well sometimes, because you have to put them first. You have to, and that just is the way it is, and that can be slightly at odds with how you've probably been before. And so you've spent years just putting work first, and then all of a sudden this little person's coming that's not compliant, and if they're ill, they're ill, and if they're not going to sleep, they're not going to sleep, and you're expected to just, or you're putting that pressure on yourself to perform the next day, or cancel that meeting or whatever it might be. And I think you be kind to yourself. That would be another thing. I think you just have to be kind to yourself and realistic.
Yeah, and I think a lot of in the coaching I've done, and I'm sure you've come across it, guys, as well, is that people say, oh, I'll be back to work in 6 weeks or 3 months, but you have absolutely no idea how you're going to feel and how that change is going to impact, like you say.
But some people do, and that's okay too. And I think that's the thing, because I've spoken to people where they've gone, well, I went back after 3 months, and I feel like I'm being guilted into the fact that I've gone back after 3 months. And it's whatever works for you, isn't it? And I think that's the thing. And there's no one size that fits all with this sort of thing. I think that's half the problem from an employer's perspective, is that you're sort of gripped by HR process, aren't you? But actually, it's a different animal. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So if we come on and talk about, you mentioned earlier, what are some of the successes in terms of an individual returner, and how can you make a success of it? So Russ, do you want to Claire, do you want to go first on this question?
So the phrase I'd use, Russ, was a great return often depends on a great departure.
That's it. That was it. I knew it was. There you go. I didn't want to steal your thunder. That's what it was. Brilliant.
when I'm working with clients, I think it's so important to help them to think through what they want to achieve before they go off. So if it's appropriate, you may want to get your appraisal meeting. I think that's good because you're in the zone. I think often work is a language, and then when we're with a small baby, we end up talking a different language, or with other young mothers. So I think it's good to have your appraisal, to be able to discuss, if it's appropriate, what your compensation might look like while you're away. I think it's important to do it before you go off, and maybe a week before you go off, for a couple of reasons. First off, if there's any kind of outtray, there's any surprise, which hopefully there shouldn't be with appraisals, but sometimes these things happen, you have the opportunity to sleep on it, reflect. If there's a genuine misunderstanding, which can sometimes happen, perhaps there's paperwork that you can produce, or another conversation, so that actually perhaps you can, the appraisal can be amended, or perhaps everyone can see the other person's perspective. Compensation, as I mentioned, if you've got a bonus profile, again, to understand what's the context for the business. Also, how will the organisation think about your time away? Now, I know of at least one investment bank where if you're away for 3 months or less, that is considered a whole year from a bonus perspective. So often somebody wants to know, how will you think about bonus? What does that mean? And every company or every manager needs to be able to articulate, why do we pay bonus? What will be the drivers for yours? Also, from a legal perspective, if you're a solicitor, how will your post-qualification experience, how will that time away be counted? Does it count towards it or not? And again, different firms have different perspectives. Maybe to discuss about your career development. Is there anything going to happen in the next however many months? Which you'll need training for? Are they going to bring in a new, as you said, Alyson, a new compensation framework if you're in HR? But actually, it'd be really good to make sure that you are involved in some training. Also, I think sometimes managers spend their whole time thinking about, is the person going to come back? And really, what the individual wants to think about is, how do I fit? How does my career fit into the organisation for the future, rather than, are you going to come back or not? To shift the conversation forward so that people view you as part of their future plans. And I think that takes me on nicely to, your kit days. How will you use them? Keeping in touch days, and you have up to 10 of those. Think about them so that they're a real benefit to you. What's strategic? Should it be about training, as I mentioned? Is there a town hall coming up where the organisation's strategy will change? Is there going to be a time when your team will be really under pressure, and actually you pitching up will just strengthen those bonds and be really incredibly helpful? I think also there might be sometimes an opportunity on a kit day to perhaps meet with somebody that you never get to meet with. For example, if you're in an investment bank, sometimes the engine room is often the trading floor, but sometimes it's really difficult for somebody in operations, IT, etc., or in HR to actually sit on the trading floor because there's just never time. Maybe it's an opportunity to do that, or go and liaise with a team that really you spend a lot of time speaking with, but you never actually go and meet those people. So very sort of you discuss with your manager, how can you best use those? And also, who are you going to keep in touch with? And who do you want to keep in touch with, and who do you need to keep in touch with? And communication, how's that going to look like? Do you want to sort of, rules is perhaps a poor way of articulating it, but do you want to frame how you'll be spoken to and when you'll be spoken to by your manager, so everyone feels very comfortable about how that might happen? Think about, it may be you might want to think about flexible working, and you may want to float that with your manager as to how that might work, and to really have an open dialogue. And I think, communication is really, really important. And I think there's just so much to say about this, but I'm conscious of the time. But I think to be very successful, it's about that good departure, that good foundation, communication while you're away. And when you're returning, be really open with your manager, what's working, what's not working, so that you can really, you can find that sweet spot between what works for you as an individual, but also what works for the business, because ultimately that's going to be the thing that really makes you flourish. Sorry, that was the answer.
No, it's great, Claire. Thank you for that very, very complex answer, but comprehensive, I think the word was I was looking for. Thinking about it, what I was thinking about one of my clients, they mentioned one of the biggest challenges for them might be the visibility. And I think, that whole thing of people think they're going to get forgotten, particularly if they have 12 months off. Have you any thoughts on that, Russ? Is there anything that...
I think Claire said it really well, really, in terms of communication. The other thing, I think, post-pandemic, I think we said, as said in the green room earlier, like there's been some benefits to the pandemic, and that is the way we work and the way we communicate has changed quite significantly. And I think in moments when you're away from the office for a prolonged period of time, it is sort of thinking about things like what does your LinkedIn presence look like? How can you stay connected with people without necessarily having to travel or having to go into the office? Or how do you jump onto a Zoom call or a team huddle or whatever it might be? It doesn't have to be a massive. I remember one of my kit days was there was an event going on in the head office, and I remember it was like like you say, like get the children ready, get them in the car, get them down the motorway. Have you got the snack? It was a big like logistical operation. Whereas actually, kind of now there's a lot of online Zoom versions of that, and it would be much easier to jump onto that. But I think the communication and keeping in touch with people, and who also, if you think about your own career development before you have that period of time away, I always talk to people about who's on your bench, who's fighting your corner, who's in the meeting rooms championing you. It's those people still exist, and they need to keep doing that. So I think to your point earlier about being planned to depart, what conversation can you have with those people that are going to be your allies while you're away? So when those acquisitions happen or the reorgs happen, that you're not forgotten because other people are sort of talking on your behalf almost.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, as part of my reading, I saw there was a sort of a really interesting article that said, before you leave, perhaps you should identify who will be the person that keeps you in information loop. What are the things you absolutely have to do so that you're not looking at 100 emails on your thousands of emails on your return, and who will be the sort of mentor, who will be the person that says, what about Russ? That's an interesting project coming up. He's back in 2025 or whatever that might be. Should we be thinking about him as a possibility for that slot?
Yeah. Great, thank you for that. Russ, you mentioned earlier about the opposite side of the table. What does a manager need to consider when they're thinking about transitioning somebody back into the workplace?
So it's equally a complex answer, really. But I think the one, if I had to say one thing, it would be try and keep the human in mind with this sort of thing, and try and see the person as a person. And I know deeply people believe that's what they do, but it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of, okay, this is an HR process thing, and I've got to be very careful about how we do this. And it's all, there's all these different pressures. But I guess if we can demonstrate some empathy as an employer to the people that are returning to work, that has to count for something, and probably is the one thing I would say an employer needs to do, connecting on a human level and understanding how hard it might be, first and foremost. And then equally, it's asking the right questions of the person and being curious with that individual. So having a bit of empathy for the fact that this person is going through a seismic change, whether, again, I'd kind of, it's not exclusive to children. Like it's when you go off for an extended period of time and you come back, you have, if you've traveled the world 3 times, whatever it might be, you're going to come back a different version of yourself. But I think the employer can be curious and ask questions to sort of get people thinking. So what is it that you want to do? What are you passionate about? What are you passionate about now? What are your career drivers now? Because I know I talk to a lot of people about career drivers and how I use myself as an example. They're fundamentally different to the career drivers that I had 5 years ago. I don't even recognise myself 5 years ago, you know, and it's not assuming that the person that's returning is necessarily thinking like that, but it's kind of the employer's responsibility to get that dialogue going. But I also think from an employer's perspective, is looking at it really pragmatically and not being scared to say this isn't going to work for us. So they talk about reasonable adjustments. It's all right to say, I think that's not going to work. That's not going to work for our organisation. And what if that's not going to work? What is going to work? And how do we make it so that everyone's comfortable? And it's not being scared to have those kind of robust conversations. Who can step up? Who can take on the slack? Not also assuming that people will just work full-time for part-time hours. I think that's something I feel quite passionate about, because you know, I've seen it happen so many times. So it's being clever on your employer's behalf, because ultimately, if you've got an engaged employee and great talent that's gone off for a year, they're going to be an asset one way or another. But actually, their own fear of judgment might be what makes them perform. But it's just being a human employer and going, well, you know, you don't need to do that. This is what this looks like now. Because when you're talking about returning, like changing your hours, I remember really weirdly having this bizarre conversation with my employer. They were asking me about tea breaks and lunch hours. I'm like, I never used to have a lunch hour. Like, what are you talking about? Why are we doing that? And it's because you're forced into this. Well, we've got to look at the remuneration package and work out the hours by, and it's almost going back to sort of working like an hourly paid individual, when I don't think I'd had a lunch break in my whole career in my last employer. But you're forced into that space. So it's just navigating that together. I think it's definitely about being collaborative with the person that's returning to work, for sure. I don't know whether you agree, Claire. Or...
I do. I think that's, you know, absolutely spot on. I think particularly having worked with a number of maternity returners who worked in big organisations, I think obviously managers need to know what they have to do, legislative framework, but they also need to know, often some firms do fantastic flexible policies, but sometimes the managers don't know about them. Or, you know, don't really embrace them. So kind of as a manager, do make sure you know what's out there. And then actually you spoke very eloquently about that sweet spot, which is working out what works for the business, but also works for the individual. And engagement is definitely the way forward. If you get a talented, engaged person, that's perfect.
I think just to add to that point as well, Claire, there's a really, if you can get it, it's brilliant. It's not always possible, but being able to see other role models within your organisation and visible leadership with some of this stuff. And flexible working is something that everybody talks about. Flexible working, don't they? They talk about, you know, we're a flexible employer. This is the culture that we want to have in the organisation, that everyone can do what they want when they want it. It's about being output driven. And the times I've spoken to people, leaders and also people that are wanting to be working flexibly, where they're just simply not, they can't get it over the line. And when you look into it, you realise that there's no visible leadership with this. So you've got senior leaders banging on about flexible working, but yet they're all not flexibly working. So with parental leave and returning to work, it's trying to sort of see those role models within the organisation that are doing some of this stuff as well, because you sort of almost need the permission, don't you?
Yeah, interesting question come in here from Hannah, saying, is it okay to change your plans, and how do you tell your employer? Either of you have any experience of that?
Wow. So, Hannah, yes, it's obviously okay to change your plans, but there are certain legislative frameworks, which I'm not going to go into now because I don't have the dates at my fingertips, but there are certain frameworks that you have to tell your employers within a certain time. And I guess to the points we've been discussing earlier, it's about communication. So if you're having a regular dialogue, I think you can hopefully take your employer with you, because actually you're saying things have changed, you know, perhaps your child's not well, you know, and it's hopefully not such a bolt from the blue because you're in regular dialogue.
Right. I'm conscious of time, guys. I don't know where that's gone. It's nearly half an hour. So I'm just going to ask both of you if you would like to leave us with your top tips, please.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, yes,
I mean, it's probably no surprise that I'm going to say just allow yourself to be. Don't overthink it, and be kind to yourself. And just know that you are absolutely 100% not alone, and there will be a million other people that will have gone through this and feeling the same as you. There'll be a million people feeling differently, and there'll be a million people that don't care. But whatever you're feeling is real. And you just need to know that it will be all right so long as the communication is there between you and your employer.
Thanks, Russ. Claire?
I think I would probably hark back to my point about a great return is about a great departure. And you are building a new family. And with any building project, you need good foundations.
Excellent. A lovely analogy. Thank you for that. Thanks, guys, very much for the session today. For everybody watching, thank you for joining us. For those of you who are listening later, I hope you find it informative. Our next session is on the 12th of March and is hosted by Dean Jameson. And this is a session on LinkedIn Premium. Is it worth it? So again, some insightful messages coming out of that session, I'm sure. So we'll see you all again on the 12th of March. Thanks again for today, guys.
No problem. Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.